This is a graph plotting all of the greatest perimeter scorers and their performances in the clutch during the regular season over the past 2 decades. Right here is Paul George, here is Jimmy Butler, and here is Damian Lillard. And like I said, this graph scales over the past 20 years. So here are all-time greats such as Dwayne Wade, Allen Iverson, and both Ray Allen and Dirk Nowitzki. All the way over here is Kyrie Irving. Down here is Kobe Bryant. And all the way up here is LeBron James. Not too long ago, I made a video answering the question, who is the greatest clutch performer the NBA has seen over the past 10 years? In that video, we all learned a lot about the league and some of the greatest volume scorers and what they are able to do in the most pressure moments of their careers. But after that video, I did want to figure out, as well as many other people, who is the greatest clutch performer, not only of the last decade, but in the past 2 decades, which made things a bit more difficult, largely because these numbers are extremely hard to come across. So just for my viewers, I dig deep, did the research, and came to the conclusion of who is the greatest clutch performer in the past 2 decades in the NBA. And you would be surprised that all of these performers still do not amount to the greatest clutch performer of all time, and that is today's sponsors, Manscaped. Manscaped is the best when it comes to men's well-grooming and hygiene. And trust me when I say you definitely want to use Manscaped's products, because as I start to age, grooming is something that I'm starting to realize is very, very, very important. And luckily today, Manscaped hooked me up with the all-in-one performance package kit. Whole bunch of tools and goodies inside that make sure you got your grooming on point. First, we have the new Lawnmower 3.0, a waterproof trimmer with advanced skin-safe technology. And with that technology, it reduces nicks and cuts, and on top of that, there's an LED light on top of it so you can get in those little nice dark crevices down low in your man area. Second, we have the crop preserver. So after you clean up with the lawnmower, you double back with the crop preserver, which is a ball deodorant that makes sure everything smells nice and perky down there. After that, we have the weed whacker, because all those little areas in your body, your nose and your ears that the lawnmower cannot reach, you know, Manscaped got you right, so they give you the weed whacker, getting all those little crevices. And for a limited time, Manscaped is giving you a little bit extra on the side with some free gifts. First, you have the Shed Travel Bag, nice and elaborate. And also, you have the anti-chafing boxer briefs. Now, I'm not gonna put these on camera, but I ain't gonna lie, these are nice. Okay, these are very comfy. So if you're interested, which I know you are, go to manscaped.com today. Get 20% off plus free shipping plus the 2 free gifts when you use my promo code LOW20 at manscaped.com. And when all that goodness comes in the mail, not only will you thank me, but your bodies and balls will thank me too. Now let's go back to the graph. Now I'm pretty sure the first question that many people have to ask is, how exactly am I defining clutch? Because in these conversations, so many people, in an attempt to manipulate the answers, will change the parameters to best favor their argument. And because of this, I decided to just use the default settings on NBA.com and how they decide to define what in the clutch is, which so happens to be the last 5 minutes in a game where the score differential is 5 points or less. Also, for the people out there who are wondering who I included in my studies, quite simply, any player who averaged 15 points or more for any extended period of time, as well as being a perimeter player, more than likely made this list, outside of a few exceptions. And if you look at this graph, which simply conveys the field goal percentage in contrast to the amount of made field goals in the clutch per game, you can clearly tell that not only is LeBron James head and shoulders amongst everyone else, but he has the volume there as well. And for full transparency, here are all of the players that I included in my research, along with their field goals made in the clutch per game, as well as their field goal percentage. And again, as you can clearly see, and it's even more prominent now, LeBron James is head and shoulders above everyone else. And then on the other end of the spectrum, which essentially is below average, we have players such as Trace McGrady, Allen Iverson, Paul George, who was at the bottom in my last video and still is now, and of course, Kobe Bryant. Now, I already hear all of these stat nerds in the background yelling out that field goal percentage is not the proper way to assess efficiency, which is correct. Please remember that field goal percentage equals accuracy, not efficiency. So if we want to look at efficiency, then you would have to look at this graph here. And with this graph, you can clearly tell that there are a few things that are different, but since the field goal made per game are the same, you more or less can kind of guess where some of these names are at. And just to highlight a few of these names, Allen Iverson is all the way at the bottom. Carmelo, Vince Carter, and Tracy McGrady are relatively close to one another. At the top, we have Ray Allen, LeBron, Kyrie Irving, but all the way at the tippy top, we have Steph Curry, and yet again, towards the bottom, we still have Kobe Bryant. And again, for full transparency, here's a list of all of the players sorted by their effective field goal percentage, and again, the last 5 minutes of a game in which the point differential is 5 points or less during the regular season. And with these numbers, it is very important to point out that someone like Paul George, who was all the way at the bottom in the last graph, now finds himself around average just because most of the shots that he attempts in these situations are three-pointers, which obviously would up his efficiency. And again, you can clearly see that being represented in this infographic. Another thing to point out is that most of the players who are on the bottom half of this list are players who played during the 2000s, which makes sense since most of these players just were not attempting three-pointers at the same volume that we see them being attempted at in today's game. And with that being said, it is still very impressive that Dirk Nowitzki finds himself this high up on this list just because he played in an era where there just wasn't that much three-point shooting. However, in my opinion, the most impressive thing about this list is that LeBron James is third. And he spent a huge portion of his career being an average to below average three-point shooter, especially in contrast to a lot of other players in today's league. So looking at accuracy and efficiency, LeBron finds himself at the top. But for many people, this just isn't enough. Pointing out what a player may do during a meaningless regular season game just isn't important enough in the conversation that needs to be had with a lot of these numbers. So of course, we have to dig a bit more deeper and look at how these players perform in the playoffs. And of course, that is a fair statement, especially when we're talking about clutch performers. The higher the stakes, the more pressure that is put on a player, the more impressive it is to see someone perform on that stage. So I did my research, but I had to do a little tweaking to the numbers. While doing my research, I realized that if I just limited these numbers to the last 5 minutes in a game when the point differential was 5 or less, then the sample size just wasn't going to be large enough. Also, I felt like having such strict limitations on my research really doesn't do playoff games justice, because the reality of it all is every moment in the playoffs is pressurized. And so personally, I felt like the best way to get a great sample size while still staying true to being in the clutch was to just look at the entirety of the fourth quarter of playoff games when the point differential was 5 or less. Right here is Tracy McGrady, all the way at the bottom. Here, interestingly enough, are both LeBron James and Kevin Durant, with LeBron edging KD out just by a little bit. Here is Kyrie Irving, who took a drastic step in the wrong direction, whose field goal percentage plummets in the playoffs in the clutch in contrast to his numbers during the regular season. Here is Russell Westbrook. Up here is Jimmy Butler, very impressive. Here is Allen Iverson, which is also extremely impressive, especially since most people criticize Iverson for not being efficient. And all the way at the top, we have Chris Paul, which if you watch my last video shouldn't be surprising at all, because Chris Paul's clutch numbers in the playoffs are stupendous. They are amazing and more people should talk about them. But the one thing that I just can't shake, and we can go ahead and address the elephant in the room, and that is Kobe Bryant's numbers. Even though Kobe Bryant has built an amazing reputation of being a clutch performer, when you look at his numbers, they just don't back up those claims. And even going into this video, I knew for a fact Kobe's numbers were going to be very suspect. I didn't think that they were going to be this bad. And just looking at the field goal percentage, I was actually surprised that Kobe was so low on this list. But for some of you, that still isn't enough, because I know for a fact many people want to know who is a player that I'm giving the ball to tie the game or take the lead in a playoff situation. And of course, I did my research for that as well. Now, I'm not going to put these numbers on a graph just because the volume varies so much so that it honestly just wouldn't fit. However, as you can clearly tell, these numbers are very eye-opening. Even though, yes, players such as Jimmy Butler, Kyrie Irving, and Chris Paul are at the top of the list, one can argue the volume isn't high enough to make a legitimate argument for them being the best performers in these late game situations. And on the other hand, players such as Paul Pierce, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Kobe Bryant all have the volume, but their percentages are on the wrong side of 30. So honestly, in these late game situations, the 2 to 3 best players to give the ball to are either Ray Allen, LeBron James, or Dirk Nowitzki. Which then leads me to the only conclusion that someone can make after looking at all of these numbers. LeBron is the only player out of all of these lists that consistently finished top 5. And when you take into consideration the volume that came along with it, it is undeniable, at worst, LeBron is one of the greatest clutch performers in the past 20 years. But I would argue, and most people should argue, that LeBron James is the greatest clutch performer the game has witnessed over the past 20 years. But with that being said, people, please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Again, thank you for today's sponsors, Manscaped, for sponsoring the video. Make sure you click the link down below and use my promo code LOW20. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.